Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Give folks a chance to log on. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Jerry Pell Grand Rounds. Really glad all of you were able to join us today. This is going to be an amazing talk from one of my favorite speakers. We have a special guest today, Dr. Helen Fernandez, who is a professor of geriatrics and palliative medicine and medical education at Mount Sinai, at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So she's coming to us all the way from New York City. Thank you so much for taking the time today. Dr. Fernandez, who many of you saw this year giving her acceptance speech for the Janigan Award at the American Geriatric Society meeting, is just known nationally and internationally for her work in geriatrics and palliative medicine education. She's really changed the landscape of geriatrics education in this country. She developed the Jerry Pell fellowship program at Mount Sinai that's been disseminated nationally and really changed the way that geriatrics and palliative medicine are integrated, especially in training. So I can go on for the entire hour talking about her accomplishments, but instead I will just let Dr. Fernandez take over and talk to us about a really important initiative, the Reframing Aging Initiative, that she's going to tell us all about.
Thank you, Kate, for that wonderful welcome. And thank you to seeing many familiar faces as well as names. So happy, very happy to be here. And I'm going to share my screen through, and I have some videos. I will ask you some questions over chat and to give you an opportunity to really dig into this material that is actually a part of an initiative of 9 organizations and foundations, including AGS. So here we go. This is always the fun part. All right. So when it comes to conversations about older people, we have to really think about it differently. And one of the things that I will say is that as a geriatric and palliative medicine faculty, it was hard to kind of think about this reframing because a lot of it has to do with, one, accepting the public perception of what aging looks like. 2, kind of accepting the fact that we have a lot of information and we want to put it out there, and we want to talk about the spectrum of aging, right? And we want to include there people that don't age successfully, that may have more frailty. And so I will say that this might sound a bit challenging for you when we're talking about it, because you're feeling that maybe I'm not telling every piece of aging. And what I will say, and you'll learn through the research that Framing Works has done, is that our message isn't being heard in the way that we're saying it. So we have to change up how we're giving that message. So this is a social change endeavor designed to improve the public's understanding of aging. And it was, original research was conducted through Frameworks Institute and leaders of aging organizations. And this is the funding that, not for me personally, but for Reframing Institute. Through Hartford, many of you know Archstone Endowment for Health. And here were the leaders that signed up to be part of this reframing. And what you can see here It's not only organizations that we're familiar with in terms of FAR and AGS and GSA, but it's also grant funders, ASA, AARP. There's also the Film Institute that was part of this. So all of these groups were actually part of the training. And Frameworks in itself is a nonprofit think tank, and it conducts its own original scholarly research, which I will share with you. And it really, and they've given the permission to present this material today to help us think and have a dialogue, a discussion on how to reframe. And when I was originally in the room now, close to about 6 or 7 years ago, in the room with me getting this similar training were representatives from all these different funders. My disclosures, I'm not being paid by them. All I did was get training from them. And I go around and independently present their work to help us engage in this work. So what I hope to achieve with you is to tell you about framing, look at framing, the research that they did, look at some of their qualitative and quantitative results, and then think about how to use that information to reframe aging. And then we're actually going to do a little framing practice, and I'll also share what AGS has done too. So what is framing? So framing is thinking about a certain perception of how it's presented, and then what cognitive kind of shortcuts and assumptions that you might have when you're looking at that. So I'm going to show you a video, and I want you to think about when you're seeing this video, what is the underlying assumption about aging that people are expressing in this video? If more Americans are turning 65 than ever before, how might these assumptions impact the work that we're doing and the patient's care and policy?
Hey, how's it going? You can stand right there, that's your mark. How you doing?
I'm great, how are you?
Great.
Awesome.
Just tell us your first name and your age.
My real age?
My name is Paolo. I'm 25 years old.
My name is Daniela, and I'm 19.
24. 35.
31, 33.
I'm 26 years old.
What age do you consider to be old?
Late 40s?
Maybe 50.
I feel like 30 is a new 20, so I'd say like 40 is old.
I'd probably say 50s.
I'd like you to show me how an old person would cross the street. Show me how an old person would send a text message. How might an old person do a push-up? What about jumping jacks?
All right, so in the chat, tell me, what are some of those assumptions that you think were being made in this video? And how could that influence the work that we're doing?
It seemed like people were demonstrating that frailty is the norm for people in their 50s.
Right, so even the age bracket, as one is in that age bracket, we didn't even know we were that way, but frailty, you're right, is a big theme. And I saw that again in the chat. What other assumptions would be made? Assume that higher age is negative. Mm-hmm. Old implies weakness, implies lack of tech savvy. Angela writes, it seems to me that they're characterizing very old people, then they're saying 30 is old. I mean, they do watch TV with 30-year-olds in it, right? So cognitive processing is slower, right? So it's not just even the physical, it's the cognitive piece as well. And how do you think this might influence when we are trying to engage in a conversation, trying to do policy, or just trying to help public understanding? How might this impact? Type or unmute yourself, whatever. It seems important to always define what we mean by older adult. Though.
Yeah, it seems to me that they're implying that these quote unquote older people are sort of a lost cause. You know, they're already frail, they're already stupid, and maybe they won't take as much of a vested interest in what's going to happen to them or what their interests are.
That's a great point. That's a great point, right? There's a lot of ageism, right, in these assumptions. And what is ageism? It's a bias of your future self, because either you age or you die, right? There's no in between. Rachel talks about they're demonstrating specifically undesirable states, which is true. Old is not what any of these folks want to be. So they may not care as much about what policies can pertain. Things that are inevitable don't need political priority. Implies older people can't be independent. They feel that they don't need to see a geriatrician because they didn't fit the old stereotype. All of the demonstrations were specifically other than people doing them. None of them just behave the same. So that's a great theme, and we're going to talk about that as we're trying to reframe that understanding. If we use these actors' behaviors as the basis of programming, then we misprogram those who are actively engaged. Great point. So I think we need to understand that that's the assumption. And I'll share with you some of that data, because that was through a campaign ARP that used some of the data that frameworks did. And what is framing? It's a process of making choices, how to communicate information, to help the audience, to help the public understand. What do we emphasize? How do we explain it? And what do we leave to be unsaid? So I'll give you an example. I am first generation Colombian, and growing up, there were a lot of assumptions. I love my culture. I love the diversity of my culture and my country. And to me, right, I'm going to show you what Colombian means, growing up, going there every summer, and the majority of my family living there.
Colombia, a rising, diverse, and vibrant country with lively cities. Thanks to its geological location, there are a wide range of ecosystems. Colombia has 7 different climate zones.
Hey,
starting in the vast
I don't
Andean
think
region.
that you're sharing
with
what the
altitudes
video
reaching 20
is. It's just the audio.
Oh, it's just sharing the audio. Let me tap. Love. Let's see that.
Colombia, a rising, diverse, and vibrant country with lively cities. Thanks to its geological location, there are a wide range of ecosystems. Colombia has 7 different climate zones. Starting in the vast Andean region, with altitudes reaching 20,000 feet. It's coffee growing region where the smoothest coffee in the world is harvested, down to the dense jungles of the Amazon.
So would you want to go there? If you haven't been there? Probably. But what commonly, and even growing up, what people perceived as my heritage was very different. And I'll show you that. And again, I think this is what highlights, this is the problem. Tell me if this works. It does not work. It's when you try to get fancy, sharing things.
Yeah, you guessed it. Pablo Escobar, the man who would change my life forever. Pablo was making a killing in the smuggling business. Cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, you name it. At the time, Pablo owned half the police in Medellin.
So in thinking about the perceptions of Colombia in the media, in video, right? Very different from the first video clip that I showed you, right? They're always pictured kind of as drug dealers. The only way they know how to make money is through dealing drugs, when it's a country rich in culture, emeralds, and a lot of other resources, oil, food, flowers, right? So here, I wanted to just show you and demonstrate how framing is really, really important, and how it is dangerous in terms of how these assumptions are made. I'm going to take you through, sorry, another couple of examples. So this was an interesting campaign of how to reframe this campaign that was done with vegetables. And when grocers, US grocers, were trying to have people not waste certain vegetables. And most people see to the left, beautiful carrots, right? I'm gonna buy those look very appetizing, versus to the right, just as edible, just as tasty, but visually not appealing. And so the campaign to reframe selling these gross, these ugly vegetables was with the apple. A grotesque apple a day keeps the doctor away as well. Or the ugly carrot in a soup, who cares, right? So thinking again about how we're reframing. So how could this reframing not just be about vegetables? How could it be about taking action and policy? If I was going to tell you and give you a campaign about the effect of crime and how I wanted you to support a policy to decrease crime in my community. And one campaign I used was "Crime is a Beast Affecting Our City." How many people do you think would support that policy? A percentage. Is it 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%? Less, more? What do you think? I hear 90%. May depend on the political party. That's a good one. Let's say we flipped it a little bit, and it's the second part, the bottom part. Let's say my campaign for support says crime is a virus affecting our cities. What do you think the percent policy support would be there? Granted, I understand that we're in the midst of a virus. You lost people, I think. So it'd be interesting to conduct this research, because they did do this beforehand, now in the midst of COVID. And what's interesting at the time, at the time, policy support for crime is a beast affecting our city was 29%, versus crime is a virus, which is 46%. For people, the concept of being able to actually, in normal times, treat a virus and be able to get rid of it seemed to be more tenable than crime as a beast, which almost, when people were being interviewed, was unattainable, was almost a fairy tale-ish. So it's interesting, again, kind of the vocabulary matters, and how you frame it matters. So framing can really change public policy. It can successfully shape how people see aging. It can help in terms of attitudes, and it can help in terms of getting legislators to invest in the future. What it isn't, right, is just a cookbook. It's not an admission that we've been doing it wrong, right? It's not a mandate that you have to change who you are, what you do, right? And it's not a cure-all, and it's not kind of, okay, this is a panacea that is going to improve everything and revolutionize everything, right? What it is taking what public opinion knows, their strengths, knowing that there's limitations on it, and trying to offer in a communicative way, a way to really kind of get into those perceptions, right? And understand them. And understand this is one piece of the formula in terms of how do you improve perceptions. So what do we know in terms of what the swamp is, a public understanding of aging? The swamp in this context for this research is these cognitive shortcuts that people do to make sense of things they just don't understand as well or unfamiliar, right? It's based on assumptions and biases because we're filling the conversation. And wherever the conversation is filled, right, it's usually based on some assumptions. So what did frameworks do? So it actually asked a couple of research questions. What does research say about aging? How does the public think about it? And what is the field, our field, talking about aging? And what is the public actually hearing? They did a literature review. They interviewed researchers, lay people. They did some thematic analysis. And then they went further. They had a phase 2 where they did a lot of close to 100 on-the-street interviews. They did surveys with over 10,000 people, and then took those concepts and actually retested them in smaller groups. So what do we think in terms of how the swamp contributes to these aging perceptions? So these are the themes that they got out of all those surveys, on the street interviews, and small group interviews. What was stated before in that original video that ARP showed, that us versus them, right? That's not me, it's somebody else. There's digital incompetency. That aging somehow is also based on your individual choice, your lifestyle choice, that you should have planned better financially. There is a perception that is also not completely negative, of that there are problems that can be solved, that there is a collective responsibility, that there is the ideal versus what's perceived, right? Of accumulated wisdom, self-sufficiency, staying active, right? But then there's also a perception of loss of control, dependency, determination. Also this feeling of nostalgia, threat of a modern world, of financial economic challenges, and that Social Security is doomed, right? So this is the swamp of which the public is seeing aging, right? And I think it's good to understand that swamp, because that's kind of where we have to work from, right? So here are some of the samples of on the street interviews when they were asked, when you talk about a senior, the average American thinks of.
When would you say a person is old?
Well, to me, old would be somebody who is over 80.
Probably when they retire, so around 65.
60.
60s?
50s.
Maybe around 50.
There's a young old, a middle old, and an old old.
It's a mental thing to me.
It's not age driven, it's when they start acting old.
So that's a kind of example of some, and we saw a range there, right? A range in terms of age. Some that we're even talking about kind of the older old as well. In general, though, on a lot of street interviews and these surveys, the oldest was usually around 69 and definitely perceived as less competent. One kind of interview talked about getting older isn't all that bad. Besides, we've been aging all our lives. How much different would it be when we're seniors, which I thought was a nice.
Think of any advantages to getting older in America?
Not really.
Surely, if you're lucky or rich, you can get a second wind, but most people are just hoping their health doesn't give out before their 401k. And, you know, we invited them to think about, the researchers invited them to think about the impact of aging. And, you know, and think about the way we sometimes present this with huge, stark demographic shifts. And it's pretty much how we've kind of talked about for a long time our field in terms of, right, you know, 2030, 2050, right? 20% of older adults will be over the age of 65. And the ones over 85 and 100 are the biggest growing segment of the population. One of the things that I think is really important is I started thinking about for myself, like how many times have I done that? And I remember before I did this work, even when I was being interviewed for CNN in Espanol, and I was being prepped with AGS, was giving me some materials, and I went on the show, and the newscaster asked me, you know, I've heard about the silver tsunami you all talk about, and that's not something I want to happen to me. Tsunamis are scary. And, you know, it just seems like a horrible thing. I'll drown, something bad is going to happen. And again, I think we were trying to make a message that, you know, it's coming and let's get prepared. But what was being perceived as this is something bad, I don't want to be part of it. So how do we make those shifts, right? How do we, and again, I don't think I was wrong in trying to talk about the demographic shift, but it might have been the way or approach or the language that I was using in order to have the message come across. I wanted to show you, that was a TMZ, they actually did a TMZ video for this frameworks, which is really funny. But one of the biggest aspects also came around economy and not having enough resources and what the care would look like. Or that, you know what, we have enough hospitals, we're doing Meals on Wheels, and isn't that just enough, right? So the perception is that these small policies were going to improve. And so I think, you know, I think thinking about this kind of being the background in which people perceive our work, I think helped kind of reframe what the public perception is versus our perception. And I think this slide summarizes that a bit of what we think about in terms of our approach in aging and what the public. And the public was a lot of battle, a lot of individualism. You know, there was nothing much in terms of doing to preserve well-being, and that we had a limited, that the public had a limited role. And so I think, again, it's giving us more understanding. They even framed in terms of competency from being more competent to least competent, and age was a big part of that. I think the piece that we can think about is visiting some of the language that we use in terms of communicating. So think about this and how we're saying it. Seniors have special healthcare needs that that can be managed, that can make their care more complicated. Approximately 20,000 geriatricians are needed now to care for 14 million older adults. As of 2016, there are over 7,000 certified geriatricians nationwide. How is it being heard? Well, we're rare species. We're endangered, right? Geriatrics is one of the few medical specialties in the United States contracting even as the need increases, ranking at the bottom list of specialties that residents pursue. People avoid the field for understandable reasons. So what might be a different way of reframing this message? Geriatrics is the absolute best specialty by space. It is very needed. Geriatricians have added competencies. Right. And I think it's kind of focusing and starting not with the negative language that often may be associated with it, but actually enhancing the positive. We help people live their fullest life as they age. Excellent. Highest satisfaction of all specialties. We're specializing in caring for older adults, are leaders in transforming healthcare for older adults, educating medical students. So you can see right there, just with us doing a few of these mission-focused work, it is important specialty and geriatricians have a critical role in healthcare, especially in modern medicine as it evolves. You should all be part of this campaign. Right? Because AGS is not going to put on their website, are you a candidate for the care that few pursue for obvious reasons? Right? That's wrong. That's not going to help. So what does reframing? So you all just kind of did that, right? The frameworks helped us map the terrain, and now we're developing a strategy to navigate to a higher ground and build a caravan so that others will travel with us, right? And so there's several frames that we can use in terms of trying to reframe this conversation. We can use social justice, the justice frame, and then the other three, which are embracing the dynamic frame. Let's use ingenuity or building momentum or social construct. And all of these frameworks has as examples of how we can look at the language in terms of how we communicate for policy. We're going to take one in specific, ingenuity, and think about it. So ingenuity is embracing this dynamic frame. What does it mean? Let's use innovation to revision aging in the United States. How does it work? As we get older, we build momentum, which powers us to take new ideas and advance towards new goals. This energy powers up our society and moves our communities forward. What are the concrete solutions? For example, intergenerational community center can boost older people's participation in communities, right? So thinking again of how we can problem solve. So with ingenuity, it's what is the issue that matters? Why, right? Why does it matter? What's at stake? What's the story that we have to tell, right? More Americans living stronger, healthier lives. We need to tap into our national ingenuity so that we can adjust our systems and policies to make the most of the new reality. And then taking us away from the them versus us, but it's we, right? We have great ingenuity, right? We can problem solve this together. So here's an example of how to use ingenuity. And you can tell me of these different examples, which really uses ingenuity. Is it A? And this is all about CFCs and ozone. Is it A? If we don't start coming up with better ways to solve our aging crisis, we're doomed. Government, business, the nonprofit sector, all of us need to start finding more innovative solutions and fast. Or is it B? We solve difficult problems before as a society. Remember CFCs and the hole in the ozone layer? We can find solutions to our demographic challenges too. We just need to be resourceful and put our best ideas on the table. Or is it C? It may require some resourcefulness and creative problem solving, but the average American can manage the challenges that come with older age. So of these three, if we were using ingenuity in terms of messaging for older adult healthcare, would our messaging be A, B, or C? Somebody could talk, Ben talks about all of the above. Depends on your B. I like B, B, B. So a lot of B's. And I think, again, we're using the frame, and Ben makes a good point because it does depend sometimes on who you might be speaking to. But if we were looking at the people, based on a lot of this collective research that's been done both quantitatively and qualitatively of the public, thinking about ingenuity as being a frame that we can use to try to reframe that conversation. I want you to now practice. I have an 11-year-old son, and the 100 days of school came up. And when we used to do a lot more in person, asked everybody to dress up as a 100-year-old in celebration of the 100 days of school. And this is an example of a couple of kids that dressed up as a 100-year-old. How would you reframe this assignment? Dress up as an older adult you admire most. Showcase advancements in achievement and learning over the 100 days. Have them identify things a 100-year-old would have learned during their lifetime. Instead of dressing up, bring an older adult you admire to class. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Woo!
Loving it. These are wonderful examples, right? So again, thinking about what is the messaging, because you could even find this. If you went online on Amazon, they actually have kits to dress up as an older adult, whether it be for an assignment like this or whether it be for Halloween. So you all have come up with different ways. So let's think about even another real example that talks about workforce enhancement. How would you describe the work that you do, right, for older people? If you're answering this question as an opportunity to prime people to think differently about what you're doing. And I'll give you, whether it be the work you're doing it or through the geriatric workforce enhancement, how can you use ingenuity as a frame and take a few moments to just think about how you would write that, right? A way to describe yourself and the work that you're doing with the free frame of ingenuity, of using innovation. David talks about we are guides and facilitators to help others become their best selves. I do this all the time on Jerry consults when a 66-year-old is offended that I'm here. I have extra training in some of the problems that we get when we are older. I work with older adults to help them live better, best lives, their best lives. I like all these examples, right? Because that is, we're doing this every single day. Sometimes people hear geriatrician, they say, is that a pediatrician? Right? Have you gotten that before? Right? I'll tell you a story. I remember before this administration, a couple administrations ago, I was in a policy fellowship and I was in the office of Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff with other disciplines, other specialties, and came around and introduced, and I talked about kind of what I didn't even talk about what I did. I just said, my name is Helen Fernandez, I'm a geriatrician, palliative care physician, and that, oh, are you gonna talk about how you guys are not paid enough for all the work that you're doing, and that you do a lot of work? And so it's interesting how this person who is open to kind of what we did already had the negative perception, right? And it gave me an opportunity to fill in those assumptions. Angela talks, do we risk minimizing some of the suffering if we overuse the language and not acknowledge that some problems aging like tough, like dementia, right? And I said that at the beginning, and that was part of my caveat to all of this, is that, you know, people get uncomfortable. We're not telling people the wide range of what older adults, how they are a heterogeneous population, and they can age in different ways, and they have different needs. And I will say, of course, we're not minimizing that. I think we have to get ourselves into the front door, because the way we've been doing things is not engaging the public, right? And so I think that we can show them how dementia care can be a way to have the best life possible, right? In putting more social programs, right? But I think we don't lead with, this is how impaired and frail people are, and this is why it's so important. And I think that's, you know, again, I told you that this was hard for me at the beginning because I felt like, am I not being completely truthful when I'm not saying all the spectrum of aging? And what we want to do is just start with a conversation and have them even acknowledge aging. And if they don't, then it's really hard to have any other part of the conversation. So AGS has done some reframing of its own in terms of messaging. It's looked at their journal. It's looked at the messaging they have in their mission statement. And here's an example. As more and more of us live longer and healthier lives, this presents new opportunities for our communities. Fortunately, we have a long tradition of finding innovative solutions to the problems we face. So using ingenuity as a frame here. As a nation of problem solvers, we need to tap into our ingenuity to figure out better ways to improve health and care for us all as we age. And that problem solving is what's at the heart of geriatrics. Healthcare specialty focused on care for older adults. That's the expertise at the core of geriatrics, the healthcare specialty dedicated to new and smarter ways to approach our care as we age, right? So it's, again, separating us from the them, and it's us, right? As well as using innovation and ingenuity in terms of finding those ways. There are other frames one can use, those of justice, in terms of ageism, those of building momentum as another way in talking about life force, as well as social structure, in terms of making sure that patients are living the best lives they want. So there's some, which I'll share some websites if you want to think about it. How do we think about avoiding terms like tidal wave or tsunami instead of talking about really affirmatively they're living longer and healthier lives, or think about everything in terms of even the terminology of seniors and aging, which was negatively in these studies was negative. It was a negative connotation and more about older people using the word we and us versus them, thinking about defining what ageism is. So again, this is just a quick guide. AGS is also, changing their guide for the Journal of the American Geriatric Society and avoiding terminology as othering. The AMA is also looking, as well as the American Psychological Association, in similar changes. And I do this based on, this is a picture of my son, which I talked about at the beginning, he's 11 now, and my father, who just turned 90 this past year. And he's not a super ager. He did work until he was 89, the week that COVID hit New York. And he is a now retired cardiologist. He has gotten frailer. He has gotten needing more help at home. And I want to reframe what aging is for him and how he's being perceived by others, right? This is what we all have, this example in our lives, and it could be a different person that we see, or patient or community that's driving the work. And the other, mission I have is reframing how people and improve health inequities, especially for those in the Latinx and Black community, and not making assumptions like many people did when I was growing up of being Colombian, and that we were one thing and not so many other things. So for me, it's a very personal journey. You can go to the Reframing Institute. AGS also has some great resources, their videos, their guides. And with that, I will leave some time for questions, as well as for those who have a smartphone, please use this QR code to do your survey.
Thank you so much, Helen. Anyone who has questions or thoughts you wanted to share, please type them in the chat, or feel free to unmute.
Hey, Helen, this is Angela. Thanks for reading some of my comments. We work with this kind of thing a little bit, and so your talk is really inspiring. So I work at the dementia clinic, as you may have guessed from my comments, and it is challenging, but I really like the challenge about, first and foremost, we don't want to normalize dementia in the way that we're going to say, like, this is fine, like the dog drinking the coffee and the flames meme, like everything's fine and there's fire around the dog. I don't know if people know what I'm talking about. Yeah, if you're on social media, you've probably seen. But I think there really is an important, like this can be, we do need to, as a community, come together. And as we age, as we all age in different ways, some of us walk across the street slower. Some of us do have, mild memory concerns, and baristas need to be better at making sure their voice is heard to the older person, all of these things. Yes. Like, we need to be better. But then, of course, if there's a cure for dementia, we'll give it immediately. Like, so I'm never going to normalize dementia, the point, like, it's fine. But it's also like, normalize using language like, we really try to emphasize cognitive strengths. And one of the things I've been doing, really trying to do in my clinic is, if a person has lack of insight and they feel just totally fine and safe at home, and that children may disagree. But I say, well, that's good. You feel safe at home. You feel secure in your home. And let's keep that feeling going and maybe get some supports. But, trying to emphasize, the positive things. And so this was really inspiring. And I don't know if you had comments about dementia specifically, about how to reframe that piece, but it's a challenge, but I love it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Angela. I think it's some great comments. And I think you do have to work from the point of strengths in enhancing what are the things that can help your patients remain in the community, right? In the care that they want. What is the best way to support them in order to be able to do that? And I think that's really important, right? And I think that I will say that we did see, right, you saw this probably all over social media, especially around COVID, a lot of anti-ageism, almost campaign t-shirt. I know Louise Aronson does a whole talk about this, right, in her elderhood book, about how we really separate, right, the them versus us, instead of thinking about it as a solution. And I think that one is probably reaching out even younger in terms of, not everybody's going to have a grandparent, not everybody knows an older adult, right? How can we have more intergenerational community discussions like we do in our nursing home, where they, have an opportunity to have a mentor that is an older adult who may have cognitive impairment, and how do you still interact in a meaningful way with that person? And I think it's kind of bridging some of those misunderstandings earlier than what we're doing, and really kind of and not ignoring, right? Because we know that there are those people that, because it's such a heterogeneous kind of process of aging, that there are extremes that are going to need a whole lot more resources, right? And I think that will be probably the next reframe, is how to look at that, right? Not just not only the positive campaign that aging is a slide, right? That people do it in different ways, but that really looking at the ageism that's happening out there, and realizing that it's a social justice issue just as well, and in the entitlement in terms of healthcare. So I think you pose a great question, Angela. I've seen a couple of statements here in as well. Kay talks about, I think, thinking about what is common and what is normal, things that happen with age may be common, increased incidence, but not normal, expected, and okay. Elizabeth talks about, as a reframing initiative, consider what can be learned and incorporated from other cultures where older adults are held in higher esteem. Yeah, they haven't, and I that's a great point, that that other societies have a different regard in terms of aging, even within this own country, right? And that we can learn from other societies as well. Oh yes, in primary school in Australia, they had a program where we were paired with an older adult in assisted living, and we visited them in first and second grade. I love that. I really do think that's really critical. Getting those perceptions in earlier, normalizing what aging, they're in front. I know my son knows it really well, because we live it every day with his grandparents, but he's lucky in that way. And he actually, when I went in and did a career day, and we asked the question, which is the oldest patient that I'm treating, a lot of his classmates were like, oh, the oldest person is 50. And my son's like, no, 105. And so he corrected them. And he talked about, it was kind of fascinating. He did the talking, I just stood there. So I think we should put him on the campaign. Well, I really, I don't know if there's any other questions, Kate. I really appreciate this time that I've had to talk with all of you.
Thank you so very much for this amazing talk and for sharing some of your time with us.
Thank you too. And hopefully this stimulates all of you in thinking about ways of how do you communicate with the public, with your patients, with learners. I think that's a huge, huge, huge area. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.